Ramaphosa has issued his first letter to the nation, taking us into his confidence around the pressing issues of the day and how his government is dealing with them. In it, he says the country needs to finalise a comprehensive growth strategy that takes all the work that's already been done to another level. He indicated that the government would finalise a clear economic growth strategy within the next few weeks, which would draw on the contributions that have been made by the public to the National Treasury's economic growth policy paper issued a short while back. State-owned enterprises will form part of the strategy, with a clear strategy to place Escom on a sustainable path of recovery also being finalised. Well, for more on this story, or the last couple of stories at least, I'm joined in studio by Dr Azar Jammine. He's Chief Economist at Econometrix. Thanks very much, sir, for joining us.
Good afternoon, Nompu.
Good stuff. Well, there's a lot that's happened in the last few days. Of course, the appointment of the Presidential Advisory Council, Tito Mboweni re-emphasising to his colleagues, giving them a short version presentation of the National Treasury's economic plan, and then of course the President also speaking to us directly by way of a letter today. The President, let's start with the President, shall we? The President says that there's going to be a definite, clear economic strategy in the next few weeks. Haven't we had so many strategies already?
We have, and that is why that statement will be met with a lot of skepticism. I think to some extent the President is just playing for time, because the fact is that we've had a lot of strategies, we've had a lot of plans in place. He's even himself announced some of these in successive State of the Nation addresses, and yet very few of them have actually been implemented in visible form that is seen to yield results, and people are starting to get very frustrated because they see the economy not performing well, and they say, but you know, when are these strategies actually going to be implemented? That's
right. And of course we get excited when something is stated, for example the Tito Mboweni thing, which is basically a reiteration of the economic policy paper that came out with the National Treasury a month or so ago. He basically communicated the same thing to his NEC colleagues, talking about how you need to get rid of SOEs that just don't work. They must stop funding those, and also talking about collective bargaining. It shouldn't necessarily apply to the small business sector because the wages that are set at that level become too much for them, and it also then hampers the ability for the small business sector to employ people, with them getting rid of people and so on, and lots of other recommendations. These are great recommendations, maybe, depending on where you stand, but of course you need to implement those as well.
Absolutely. Part of the reason I think you've alluded to as to why they haven't been implemented, in fact many of these ideas are not new. Even the Treasury's strategy plan was not new in many respects. A lot of it was drawn from the National Development Plan, which has been our official economic policy as a government for the last 8 years. But people are saying, are we actually going to see any of these ideas being implemented? The skepticism arises firstly from skepticism regarding the ability of the public service to implement things that are now, given the perceptions of inefficiency and an inability to actually do things and achieve things. The second skepticism arises from the factional divides, and the third one, the ideological divides within the ANC. The factional divides between the pro-Ramaphosa and the anti-Ramaphosa camps. In other words, are we going to get rid of state capture to begin with, which Ramaphosa is trying to do? The second, and ideologically, are we going to see implementation, given that so many within the ANC want to see socialist government interventionist policies rather than the market-oriented type policies that are being propounded by National Treasury?
Let me put it this way. If you had been approached by the presidency to be part of the advisory council, what would you have said?
I would have definitely accepted, but...
The reason I ask that is that some people have come out to criticize the fact that he's established this panel, saying it's too little too late. We don't need people cooking up more policy. Again, we need implementation. What's your thought around that criticism?
I think it's a very valid criticism, and one can only hope that the policy team that has been drawn up, the advisory team, will actually somehow be able to address the lack of policy implementation more acutely, because that has, you're quite right, that has what has been lacking.
Yes.
And there are ways in which, through thorough discussion, they may be able to start getting that going. And I think President Ramaphosa alluded to that to some extent when he first announced it on Saturday or Friday, when he said, he kind of said that, they want to start seeing implementation now more than anything.
Of course, Escom is a biggie in our economy. We depend on it so much, and of course it's got huge amounts of debt, and it is a big risk in terms of our credit profile, sovereign credit profile. And we're hearing stories now about Escom asking some of its service providers to reduce the cost of their services. Do you think that's going to be practicable, and what sort of impact do you think that will have on the economy?
Unfortunately, that is going to run directly counter to some of what the trade unions are calling for, and also what these businesses are actually also in it for themselves. But these are the kind of negotiations that need to be had in order to actually get Escom on a sounder footing.
Yes.
And we also see the whole question of splitting it up and selling off parts of it or not. Is that going to meet with any favour at the end? It's interesting that Ramaphosa says we're going to see definite guidelines and a full policy in a few weeks' time. Well, let's wait and see.
Absolutely. And then one last thing, Dr. Jammine, the Basic Education Minister came out to say that they're thinking about giving grade 9s a certificate which would enable them basically to finish school but go on to technical college. There was a misunderstanding that lots of grade 9ers would be out on the streets looking for jobs. What's your feeling about that? Do you think we have the infrastructure in place to take up grade 9s who finish school at that time?
Now, I think theoretically it is a good idea. What South Africa is dreadfully lacking in from our educational system is a digression between those who are could be very usefully used from a skills perspective and artisanal perspective, and those who are more academic and go into the classical professions. Unfortunately, what has developed in over many years is all young people want to go to university and to learn professions. We desperately need people with manual skill and other such skills, and separating them out in grade 9 into different streams could actually be quite effective. However, you so rightly ask, do we have the infrastructure yet in place? Can we actually implement it? The idea isn't a bad one, but can we actually implement it?
Yeah, that's a big question. Thank you so much, Dr. Jammine, for your time. That was Dr. Azar Jammine. He's Chief Economist at Econometrix. I'll be back with more news for you at the top of the hour. Your weather details coming up next with Mpo.